As I was in the Congress Hall, I was wondering whether this is happening for real or not. It is happening. It's here. It's now. And frankly, it's quite difficult to make sense of what's really going on. But we'll try and do just that. And to help make sense of a very complex and constantly changing world, I've got two super sharp commentators, Martin Wolf from the Financial Times and Ravi Agarwal join us from Foreign Policy. Thank you very much for joining us. I want to start by asking you, Mr. Wolf, you've been coming to Davos for many decades. Have you ever seen something like this? He's got a grand stage, an assortment of countries. The Europeans are there, but they're not in the hall. They're not signing. A whole amalgamation of small countries signing this. Pakistan's there on the stage as well, and the signing of the Board of Peace. What are you making of this?
Well, I've been here for I've been to the WEF annual meeting only twice, not here, for 27 years. But of course, everything about Trump is unprecedented in some sense. And the difference between his first term and his second term is in his first term, he was surrounded by conventional people who had powerful influence. He didn't know what he wanted to do so it was a bit abnormal. When he came here in his first term, it was a pretty surreal show. They had a band playing for him. I've never forgotten that. Probably Stars and Stripes forever, I imagine. So it's always been surreal, and he's surreal. And what he's done in the last year in trade policy, upending it, the Liberation Day, April the 2nd, blowing up the trading system, then backing down, excitement, upheaval, extraordinary changes in domestic policy. So it is always a bit surreal with him, and you never know what's real and what is imaginary and where things fall in between that. But I'm not an expert. I don't understand it. With the Board of Peace, I have simply no capacity to understand what he's doing, what it's going to be for, how it will operate, how it relates to the UN, if at all. But then equally surreal to me was that last week we thought we were about to have a war between the United States and NATO over Greenland, and yesterday we discovered we weren't after all. So it's all impossible to make sense of. And I honestly think there's never been a historical parallel. I can think of dictatorial figures who would have also turned something into the Trump-Kennedy Center, all that. But no, this is something I can't really make sense of.
What in the world happened? He comes with a dagger, digs it into the heart of Europe, says, on Greenland, I won't go to war, but I want Greenland, and I want it as an ownership agreement. A few hours later, after meeting the Secretary General of NATO and the others, he changes his mind. Was that always posturing, or is he that fickle? What's going on?
Well, this I know for sure. This is all reality TV. He wants us sitting here talking about him, trying to figure out what's on his mind. I will just say, to add to what Martin said about the Board for Peace, it is surreal. There's also an element of hard-nosed realism here. I think there's a recognition on the part of both the United States and Israel that the United Nations was not serving its purpose. It was paralyzed, horribly divided, and also completely feckless on vote after vote on anything to do with Gaza. The problem with the Board of Peace, however, is that the countries it's attracting to sign on, they are not bastions of liberalism. I mean, you've got Kazakhstan, Pakistan. In Europe, you have the likes of Hungary that have signed on. Vladimir Putin of Russia was asked to join. I mean, it's a joke that you would ask someone who's been credibly accused of war crimes to join a Board of Peace. But that is the week that we're in. And in that context, the drama of yesterday in Greenland was a farce. After 24 hours of focusing so intently on what Trump said, we still don't know where we are. He made clear his designs on Greenland, but we don't know what he actually got out of the quote-unquote future deal that he made with NATO.
You're saying that the UN has been ineffective, and India has been making that case for a very long time. But how does the Board of Peace supplant that or prove any more effective, even incorporating all the inadequacies of the United Nations, Ravi?
Well, it won't. It will not incorporate all of the countries in the UN. I mean, the fact that the UN had signed on 190-plus countries is a feat of the last 80 years. That is the reason, or one of the many reasons, why the last 80 years were remarkable and maybe sort of an oasis of calm in an otherwise turbulent, crazy history of the world. So to imagine that this Board of Peace will somehow replicate that feat, I think is crazy. I think what this Board of Peace will do is add a veneer of respectability to what Trump wants to do in Gaza anyway, and also what Israel wants to do, frankly. I think the Israelis, and I spoke to their senior leaders in attendance at Davos yesterday, they see this move as adding some international ballast to the things they want to do in Gaza.
Martin Wolf, from an economic lens, how is all this constant uncertainty, the reality drama that Ravi refers to, impacting global growth? Because at least for a country like India, given the threat of tariffs, one would have conventionally imagined that growth will take a hit. A few months on, in the 2 quarters numbers that we've seen, things aren't that bad. The growth numbers have actually gone up and being revised upwards.
Yes, I think that's really a fascinating question. I've just been in a discussion among private and public sector, very senior officials. So what do we know about the world economy? It has basically continued to motor on at more or less the speed one expected a year ago, and the forecast for next year, give or take, are more or less the same. The IMF has even raised it by a percentage point or so. So if you looked at aggregate GDP, you would have to say this is a sound full of fury signifying nothing. What in the end have we left with it? How did that happen? And I think there are 2 very simple explanations. One, of course, is and this is very important, in many cases, his bite is much less fierce than his bark. So what he promised in Liberation Day, quote unquote, was not at all where he ended up. The trade war with China he lost, more or less. He has imposed very high tariffs on some countries, India included, but he has backed down in many, many cases. The tariffs are a nuisance, but they're not penal. There will be further effects, I think, on the world economy. The private sector will adjust around it, will add to uncertainty, but this isn't a decisive break yet. I think that's the first big point. The second point is there's tremendous momentum in the world economy. That's been true since the pandemic. There is the huge AI boom. There's a colossal investment boom going on in China, in manufacturing, well known. And I pointed this out many times. Basically, the world economy grows. I don't wish to understate, of course, the significance of Indian dynamism. We still have the great momentum of new technology, AI and all the rest of it, and catch-up growth, of which India is the most powerful exponent. And it takes in something enormous to solve it. But finally, there are real risks. I think there are risks of higher inflation in the US, which could well raise it, end up, in the end, after a forced attempt to keep them down, it would get very high. Interest rates would have to shoot up. We would then have the possibility of a really big financial crisis, basically concentrated on US dollars. That could affect the dollar as a key currency. So there are lots of risks, but we must emphasize the basic dynamism of the world economic system.
Ravi, one of the theories doing the rounds in Davos, and this is largely in chatter in corridors or during lunch and dinner, is that the only thing that freaks Trump out is the fear of the bond markets. The fact that the markets can take a plunge and the bond markets give him a thumbs down. How real do you think that is? One of the things being spoken of is that European leaders essentially behind the closed doors indicated to him that they would push back using the kind of leverage they have over American bond, and that is part of the reason that Trump freaked out.
This is obviously Martin's area of expertise, but I will say that Trump, in all the sort of classic characteristics of a bully, tends to be much tougher on weaker countries, weaker companies, weaker institutions. And the minute he is faced with a very tough response, whether that is China saying that, no, we're not going to export rare earths to you anymore and you have no other way to get them, or it is the threat of the bond markets, or even European leaders saying that we will respond in the toughest way possible. Those are the instances that we've seen so far that Trump is likely to step back from the brink. And in a sense, I think one of the big themes of the last year has been figuring out how to deal with Trump. On the one hand, is it flattery? Is it NATO's Secretary General calling Trump daddy? Or is it firmness and toughness? And I think we're beginning to see that the flattery never pays off because Trump always comes back for more. And being tough while it might have risks, it might have some short-term costs, in the longer term, that seems to be the strategy that pays off.
Just to emphasize, I think it's pretty clear in what happened in the last week or so that volatility in markets affected him. And I think he looks at the bond market and he looks at the dollar. It's a sort of a pretty simple indicator. Do people have confidence in him? He knows, this I think he does know, and I'm quite certain that his Treasury Secretary tells him, we are a huge debtor country. And these people you're having a war with China, Japan, European, they're our creditors. And of course the Gulf states are there. We have to pay attention to them because they can do a lot of damage. They don't need to indicate it too strongly. It's sort of there. And then finally point out, I mean, he's not a dictator in America yet. He depends on the support of the American people. It's pretty clear the polls are not going well for him. Favorability ratings are low. Confidence in the economy is low. He can't have an economic crisis. I mean, that would kill him. And he would lose complete control over Congress in that situation. And then he's a really, really lame duck. So I think he's a bully, but his position isn't that strong, either domestically or internationally, and he has to take account of reality, and economic realities and political realities, which are always interlinked, they matter.
Now, you spoke about how different countries are dealing with Trump. Spend a moment trying to explain what you're making of how India and the Indian government and the Prime Minister is dealing with Donald Trump at the moment, because we don't seem to have had much success on the trade deal, and I frankly wonder whether there's any purpose in signing a trade deal, given the fact that a few weeks, hours, days, years later, he could just change his mind on what he signed on.
True, and it's a risk, but India still is, I think, is doing the right thing in at least having those talks, because abandoning them would also be pointless. But I think India's strategy of not relying exclusively on its partnership with the United States, which, as we all know, had been growing and getting closer for the last 25 years before last year's disruption, but India is not putting all its eggs in one basket.
Now it seems like a smart thing to have done, because earlier many commentators here in Davos were asking India to align more closely with the United States. Now Jaishankar and Modi seem to have been on the right track.
In hindsight, I do think India's policy of strategic autonomy, not putting all its eggs in one basket, has been the right one. The fact that it has pursued a free trade deal with the EU, the fact that it is signing agreements with the UAE and so many other countries around the world is the right thing for India to do. And look, it's not just trade, it's also defense. India's long diversified its defense acquisitions. And I think, in a sense, this is a template now that other countries are following. For me, one of the big takeaways from this week was Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney's speech, in which he made quite clear that there's a rupture in the world order and that Canada, despite being a very big economy, was looking to diversify. And Carney, of course, was in China last week and announced a reduction in tariffs on Chinese electric vehicles, which would have been unthinkable a year ago. So there is this growing sense that middle powers around the world are seeking to cooperate with each other, seeking to build some semblance of order within a very messy new order that we're entering.
Yes.
I just want to add on India, if I may. I think what has just been said is absolutely crucial. I was worried with this rupture with the US and extraordinary, and from my point of view, completely crazy tariff policy that Trump introduced against India, because India is a really important potential partner, and his reasons are completely mad, put it bluntly. But I was concerned India's reaction would be to go back where it was, pre-1991, to say, okay, we can't trust these foreigners, we must go inward. But they are pursuing, I think, the vastly more sensible policy of actually engaging with everybody. India has lots of opportunity there because it has real weight, because of its scale, its potential, which is extraordinary. It ought to be far and away the fastest growing economy in the big economy in the world in the next 20, 30 years. People want to do deals with it. The US knows this is crazy. So I think India has lots of leverage and it should use it.
Debate here in Davos and outside, Ravi, on what happens after 3 odd years once the era of Trump is over. Mike Carney says it's not temporary, it's a rupture, suggesting that this is a long-term trend. I heard Gavin Newsom, the governor of California, this morning, and he was making the argument that no, this is not who we are. You heard Mike Carney, many American politicians feel like that even if they're not saying it, and there will be a return to the mean, as it were. Which one at this moment, while it's tough to say, which one do you think is more likely? How do you look at it?
Personally, I'm tired of Americans saying this is not who we are. It is who they are. And we've seen it not once but twice. I think Biden was allowed to say America is back, but I don't think a new Biden after Trump 2.0 will be able to say America is back again.
Why not?
Well, because you can't keep coming back and keep returning a Trump or a Trumpian leader to power. You lose credibility in the world. And trust. And I think, look, as we're seeing with Canada, as we've seen with India, countries will move on. And so, you know, what my magazine is terming this moment as is the world -1. A world in which the United States is not only pulling back from the order that it helped build, but it is actively destroying it. And what is going to happen now is collections of other countries in this interregnum period will try to find ways to cooperate, ways to align themselves. They will hedge against each other. They will compete against each other. But all of this means we're not in a new world order. We're in a new world disorder for quite a while. And this interregnum period is going to set us up for something else later. We just don't know what that is.
Yes.
Very quick. Just really 2 points. The old pre-Trump world will not come back. And certainly the old pre-Trump America won't come back. Too much damage has been done within the US and obviously internationally. Would you put all your eggs into this basket if J.D. Vance could turn up or somebody like that be president? But that doesn't mean the Trumpian ambition to create really, let's be very blunt, a consolidated autocracy is going to work. I don't think that will work anyway. I suspect America is going to be a pretty troubled place for the foreseeable future. And the world, rationally, and that's what Mark Carney was saying, we have to assume America will be a troubled place. We are very unhappy about this, well, we must move on. And that's the only sensible approach.
Wolf, Ravi, this has been a fascinating conversation. You've got some super sharp insights at a time when there's so many moving balls. Really appreciate you taking out time. Thank you very much.
Pleasure, as always.
Thank you so much. Thank you.